Hello, everybody. Hey, welcome back to the fourth step of the 12 Steps of Emotional Freedom and Deep Happiness course. Morgan and Chris are back with me, and I'm really, really excited for this step. I think this was when I really started to connect with the 12 steps, watching Morgan go through her steps as a part of her first and second year of recovery when we first met. And it was really this step. And I can't wait for Morgan and Chris to talk about the turnarounds, because specifically for me as a non-addict, like we have these stories that we tell ourselves as a part of relationships that we have with people. And it's really just a story. And then if we want to do the work around it and kind of bring it full circle, and Morgan's going to talk to us about a resentment list and how we handle all of that, the turnarounds, like how you kind of get your mind right on situations and then even potentially take it forward and really have a conversation with somebody. I have found myself and watched Morgan totally transform her relationships in her life. It's not easy work. And I'm sure Morgan will tell you that. It's not necessarily easy to own your shit to somebody. Sorry. Trying not to swear, it's Holy Week. Really to own your stuff with people and own it and have a full-on conversation with somebody, but it works, and it's really cool. So Morgan and Chris, tell us all about the fourth step. What is the fourth step and how do we do it?
All right. Chris, do you want to start?
Sure, yeah. So I like to use the analogy of, so in the fourth step, we're really looking at resentments and kind of, things that people do that cause us to be angry or cause us to sometimes even hate somebody. And we look at those situations and we write them down on paper, and we basically, what I've learned is that through doing this fourth step, that all throughout my life, it's almost like I've been carrying around this backpack of resentments. Like when somebody doesn't do something that I like, I take a rock and throw it in my backpack. And so really what this process is about is this fourth step is figuring out how to deal with these kind of moments of anger and frustration, and figuring out what our part in these situations are and how to let them go, so that we can rather than responding in life from a place of anger and fear, respond from a place of love and kindness, but also stand our ground too, so that's a little bit about the fourth step.
I love it. It sounds like we're going to unpack our backpacks.
Yeah.
Yep. So cool.
Lighten the load a little bit.
Yep.
And what also I love, and kind of is the point of this step, is to shine some light on our part in any situation. I can attest to having situations on my resentment list that I asked my sponsor, how am I ever going to turn this around? Like, how I was a legitimate victim here. How am I going to turn this around? And she said, that you're not going to. God's going to do that for you, and worry about that resentment when you get to that resentment. You have plenty more to work yourself up to until you get to that one. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you, that resentment was one of the ones that set me free and changed my life. Mm-hmm. It was a resentment against an ex-boyfriend. It was a very unhealthy, really, really bad relationship. And it was like I had PTSD from it. It was really horrific. And in doing the turnaround for that relationship on the first resentment for him, I saw that I was in a relationship with somebody that I didn't even like from the get-go, but I was so afraid of being alone. I felt so unworthy of being loved. I felt unlovable, and I wanted to be in a relationship, and I thought that that's what I deserved. And when I wrote that all out and I saw that in black and white, I felt empowered, and I felt like I wasn't a victim. I felt like I could break that cycle and I didn't have to go through that again, because now I had this information about myself. When I'm feeling desperate for somebody to be in my life, when I'm feeling desperate to not be alone, when I'm willing to settle for less than I know I deserve, that's a time that I should not be seeking out a partner. That's a time that I should be by myself, focusing on myself, and anything but drinking and looking for a boyfriend. Mm-hmm. And that turnaround, I can't even explain. So that's kind of an extreme example. But I mean, that's the point of this work, is to look at our part, disregard the other person entirely when it gets to the turnaround part, and really look at what part we played in the situation. Because, and it's not to punish us, it's not for penance, it's not to feel bad, it's to shine a light on the dark little crevices of ourselves, to see where we can get free from this stuff, and carry that awareness into our lives so we can be better and have a more fulfilled and happy, joyous, and free life. And that's
why, by the way, I have been so excited about this fourth step, because it's about finding the answers within. And that's where you and I started to connect. When you started to talk to me about the work that you were doing, and I was like, oh my God, this is so applicable to everybody. Like, I posted a video on my personal page yesterday about a altercation that I had with somebody right out in the public. And I could feel I was feeling all the feels all in my body, and I was getting all worked up. And afterwards, I think mainly because I have some tools, didn't respond really, and just sat there. I wish I had stood up for myself, but I can do a turnaround on that. But anyway, I knew that it bothered me for a reason. I knew it was my stuff. It really wasn't what that other person was saying to me and yelling at me and telling me all the things I had done wrong and calling me names. It was what was important for me, and how I grew from that was asking myself why it bothered me. Right? Why does it bother me that somebody would call me names and say something nasty to me? And when I stopped and went within, I figured it out, and so that's what I love about the work that we're going to do from here on out, because it's not necessarily about our resentments with other people. It's about our feelings of lack from within that we're projecting onto other people to somehow make ourselves the victim. Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think too, it's easier in our minds. It's easier to say, this person wronged me, I hate them, I will never speak to them again, I hate this. But the more you go through life doing that, the more you're cut off, like from other people, from God or your higher power, like, and it's just it's like this burden to carry of like hating and anger. It's so much easier to find a way to be free from that.
Totally.
Yeah.
So one thing that I always like to, that this part of this step specifically for me gave me the ability to be more present in my day-to-day life, because after looking at these resentments and putting them on paper, I could see that the way I reacted to people, that I perceive wronging me when I was a young man, like a young child, I would stuff my emotions, or I would have fear, and then so I would lash out, and I realized that, fast forward 14 years later, I'm an adult, and I'm still reacting to these situations like I'm 10 years old. And I'm rather than confronting somebody and communicating with them, or addressing situations, I would people please, or I would you know, tell myself a lie, like, well, I'm so much better than them, so they don't deserve like my, response. Or I would tell myself all these little things to kind of like make myself feel better and boost my ego up, when really it was just that I was afraid of people's opinions of me, or afraid of confrontation. And so when I was able to kind of take an objective look at some of these things that were inside me already, that because we're not creating anything new with this 4-step, we're just looking at how we handle these situations in our lives. And so when I was finally able to see that I had this deep fear of abandonment, I was able to see that this fear of abandonment caused me to not be able to get close to anybody in my life, because I was so afraid that they would leave me, but that I would leave them first. It doesn't have to be a romantic relationship. It could be like a friendship. Like I would cut them out because I was afraid that they weren't going to be loyal to me, or so I can't say enough about this step. It's just relationships are very 3-dimensional, and I think that this step helped me to see that there's a bit of good in the best of us, and there's a bit of bad in there's a bit of good in the worst of us, and a bit of bad in the best of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. All right, so how do we start it?
Okay, so leading up to this step, we've done a lot of like God questions, getting to know our higher power, identifying one, being able to, being willing to turn our will and our life over to this higher power. And that's because in this step especially, it is impossible to do without the help of a higher power. Okay. Because we can get in our way of answering these questions, but bringing our higher power and bringing God into it, when we commence this writing process, God will bring the truth out, and God will protect us and let us see what we need to see and what we're ready to see and what will help us. And so every time we start writing, what I was taught to do was get on my knees and say the 3rd step prayer that we learned in the previous step, and sit down.
Say it again for us.
What?
Say the prayer again for us.
I forget exactly. Chris, do you remember exactly the wording of it? It's different than the one that we use, so I don't have it memorized.
Okay, I'll put it in the. We'll put it in the steps.
Okay.
In the process of this.
Okay. And so you say that step prayer, and the first part of this step is to make a list of everybody all the way back throughout your life. So it is going to take some time, starting childhood to present day, of anybody you have a resentment against. Just write the name and maybe like last initial if you have repetitive names. And do this on a piece of paper or paper separate from your journal, because you're going to want to look at this list and cross the names off as you go along. And make that list. And even if you write a name down and you're like, why am I writing that down? Just go with it, leave it. There's a reason why God's bringing that out. When you're done writing, say the 3rd step prayer and wrap it up. Or if you get stuck, use that 3rd step prayer. That practice of getting on your knees and saying that prayer, I kind of thought was like, what's the point of all this? That's a lot. But through doing this writing and doing that throughout my writing, I saw that it was really God getting me in the habit of getting on my knees and asking him for help, because every time after I did that, amazing things would come out on paper. So that's the first part.
Let me pause you there just real quick, because for those of us who, still haven't identified who our God is, and maybe we're stuck a little bit on step 3 and step 2, but are really excited about step 4. I think we talked about this in the last step, but your God, your higher power, really and truly can be whatever it is that you want. But in the spiritual world, right, and in the healer world, we often talk about how God is within us, right? God is within us, and he's all around us all the time. He, she, the universe, the universal energy, universal chi, whatever you want to talk about, that force, that life force is within us and all around us all the time. So even if they get on their hands and knees and just breathe, right? And just focusing on the breath for 10 minutes prior to journaling, that will also get you to the same point of really connecting within. Because when we're asking for help from God, that we find that and can find that inside. So if people got a little stuck on that, you can also just do a little meditative prayer, and I feel confident that we're going to get into that same sweet spot of finding these answers. Because again, like Morgan was saying earlier, the answers are within us. That's the whole purpose of doing this list, right? It's not like you're asking your sponsor to answer the questions for you. We're answering these questions. So that means by definition that all of it is already within us, and we're just coming back home to find the answers. We're kind of letting the ego go, right?
Right.
Okay.
And then part 2 is now you're going to go back to your journal. So you're going to get down on your knees and say your prayer or do your ritual like Ashley just talked about. And you're going to, in that notebook or your journal, you're going to write in the top left corner of that page or top left line, 1, and then the person's name that goes along with that, with number 1 on your list of names. And you're going to write why you're angry or upset or whatever the resentment is. And if there's more than 1 for that person, go halfway down the page, draw a line, and write the next resentment, and you can flip over the page and do the same thing for as many resentments as you have. And then the third part of this, you're going to go through, so back to the beginning, back to that page with the person's name, and under each resentment, you're going to write effects, and then whatever was affected by that resentment. So we have a list of 7 effects that on the instructions you'll see. So what is usually affected by our resentments are our pocketbook, our pride, our security, our ambitions, our personal relations, our sex relations, and why am I drawing a blank, Chris?
Self-esteem.
Self-esteem. And so whichever of those, there will be multiple for that resentment, write down what was affected and do that for each resentment. And then the last part is the really juicy good stuff. And that is the turnaround part. And Chris, do you want to explain how to do the turnaround part?
Sure. So once we've written the person's name and written down the resentment that we have against them, identified the cause and the effects, we disregard, up to this point, we wrote down what they did. And now in this turnaround part, we disregard the other person entirely. And we just look at where our own behavior in dealing with this resentment. So the turnaround is we ask ourselves, where had we been selfish? And other questions that involve selfishness are, what did I want or what did I expect? And that will help us figure out selfishness. And then the next question is, where was I dishonest? Typically, when I would answer that question, I would start with the lie that I told myself was ... And then the next part is self-seeking. Where had we been self-seeking? and the question that can help us get to where we were self-seeking is, what did I do or not do to get my own way? And then after self-seeking, we write down, what was I afraid of? And if you're able to answer those questions, you're able to see, all four of those are always together. Whenever I have fear, there's always going to be some sort of dishonesty. There's going to be self-seeking, and there's going to be selfishness. So those four are the key to unlocking our own part in these resentments. And so, for example, if I were to do an example of one, it could be I'm resentful at John, the cause. He stole my wallet. What did that affect? That affected my self-esteem, because who is John for stealing my wallet? And then it affected my security. It affected my pocketbook. It affected my pride, and it affected my personal relations with John. Well, what was my part in it? And then I do a turnaround and I see that, well, I want a friend who doesn't steal my money. That's my part. Where was I dishonest? I was failing to face the fact that I was hurt by him stealing. That's actually not true. That's not dishonesty, because I'm still considering him. So I could shorten that. The dishonesty is I'm failing to face the fact that I was hurt. Just that. Where was I self-seeking? I did not confront John. I stuffed the emotion, and I lashed out when my dog, at my dog or something. Where was I afraid? I was afraid of people's opinions. I was afraid of confrontation. I was afraid of losing a friend. I was afraid of not being good enough. I was afraid of not having enough money. I was afraid of, the list goes on and on.
That's amazing, by the way, because in most people would be like, he was the victim. His wallet got taken. He didn't do anything wrong. How could he possibly own any part of that? I love that. I love the turnarounds. I love it. Morgan, can you walk us through an example of something that you've done?
Yeah, I had a very common theme in my relationships on my on my inventory was I had a lot of resentments about boyfriends who were unfaithful. So I feel like that's a good one, because that too is one where I was like, I'm a victim. So let's just go again. Let's just use John, because it's a good generic name. So where I'm resentful at John, John cheated on me. That affects my pride, my self-esteem, my personal relations, because I'm upset with John and whoever he cheated on me with. My sex relations, my ambitions, because I think this is what I deserve, so I'm not going to strive for better. My self-esteem and my security. Every guy that I date is going to cheat on me. Mm-hmm. What did I want? I wanted a boyfriend. What did I do to get what I wanted? I dated a guy I knew wasn't right for me. Where was I dishonest? I told myself I deserved this. I told myself I didn't deserve better. I chose to believe, because that would be including him, I chose to stay with him. Mm-hmm. Where was I afraid? I was afraid that I was unlovable, that I was unworthy, that I was going to be abandoned, of being alone, of other people's opinions. What would they think of me if they knew that he cheated on me? And when they find out, what are they going to think of me? And of being alone. It's a big one. So I can look at that and say, all right, well, he cheated on me. But I chose to date a guy I knew was a player. I stayed in a relationship where I wasn't being treated right, and I chose to stay. I didn't feel good about the way I was being treated, and I chose to stay because I didn't want to be alone. And I told myself that that's what I deserved. That's insane. That's crazy, but I couldn't see that really, or see how that was all connected and how that shaped who I chose for my relationship throughout my entire life until I did this work. Seeing it in black and white, I was like, oh my God. Yeah, he cheated on me, and yes, that hurt my feelings, but like, I don't have to keep picking guys I know are bad for me.
Right. Yep. And also too, I like that when you put it in black and white, you get to see the discrepancy from what you really want on the inside and then what you're willing to admit that you want, which are like in that delta, that void is that unworthiness void, right? Like, I really want this blah, blah, blah spouse or partner. But on the outside, we think we're saying what other people want to hear. And then when we're not honest with ourselves, the universe, and God knows that. So then we're that energy, right? That vibrational discrepancy ends up having us not get what we want.
Right.
Which is the hard part. But we can't even see this until we do work like this.
Right.
All right, question. So you do all of that, and then what? So
That's step 5.
Okay, so you leave them on the paper.
Yep.
Okay, and then like literally walk away?
Until you go through all of your names, all of your resentments. So once you're done with John's a real piece of work from the sound of things right now. Yep. So John's probably going to have a few. Definitely. And once you're done with the resentments for John, you can cross them off your list or put a check mark and go to the next person in your journal. So have the list in like a loose leaf paper or something that you can look at, and then do the actual writing part in your journal or notebook or whatever you're using.
Okay. And then like this could take several weeks, yeah?
Yeah.
Like, is it okay to sit down and do the whole shebang all at once, or is that like too emotionally stirring?
Oh no, that would be ideal. That would be ideal. There's no need to for us, we're undisciplined in general, alcoholics, and it takes, we're learning when we are doing this work. I think we're learning how to like do things we commit to. We're learning how to, when we say we're going to do something, follow through and do it. So some of us have a little bit harder time, and I also think that might be the human condition, but it takes a little bit hard. It's more time sometimes, but girl, for this project, just sit down and do it. 100%.
And by the way, it is a human condition, especially when you're doing self-reflection. It's very hard for us to look, for all of us, regardless, addiction, no addiction, to look at ourselves in the mirror and be honest with each other.
Yeah.
With ourselves. I mean, like mirror work. I've done mirror work with my clients before, even just getting them to look at themselves in the mirror and say, I love you. I've had clients break down in tears and be like, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. So like, I think it's a human condition thing. I think, we all experience that.
Yeah. And also the point, it's hard too for this because we have our text to refer back to, and we're trying to summarize it to put out there for you guys.
Yep.
But really the point of this step is to see ultimately how our fear drove every decision, every choice, everything, and how self-reliance failed us. because where was I selfish? Where was I self-seeking? Where was I dishonest? Where was I afraid? Those are all manifestations of self-reliance. And the purpose of this is to show us that when we bring our higher power into things, when we are reliant upon a power greater than ourselves, we're reliant on spoon, we're reliant on the energy, we're reliant on something bigger than us, our lives are a lot easier. And we can see in this step how, when we are running the show, how that works out.
Yeah, because then we do what Chris was saying earlier, is we make all these excuses and we tell ourselves the story that we need to hear in order to have this issue remain in our lives with John, you know, that bad man. And we just keep telling the story, right? So then John just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and we're giving all the power to John.
Right.
So yeah, well, I love it. All right, Chris, any last parting words for anybody on step 4?
You know, this was in this part of the 12 steps. This 4th step was where I was finally able to become an objective observer in my own life, and really just realize that I'm not like better than, I'm not less than, I'm just a human living in, you know, a world full of other humans, and I'm not perfect and nobody else is perfect. And so, you know, it's a whole lot easier to let go than to hold on to these things. So
what I thought you were going to say was, I'm not what happened to me. And I think a lot of times for women, even for men too, but mostly for women, because we somehow find ourselves in, or maybe even purposely put ourselves in situations over and over again to reinforce the fact that we're a victim, or that bad shit happens to us, or to reaffirm this trauma. And this is like unconsciously we do this until we start to do the work. But for a long time, I would describe myself as what had happened to me in my past, right? My mother abandoned me, my mother abused me, my mother was an alcoholic, all this stuff. And that was stuff that happened to me. But I think we talked about this in one of the last steps. Like, I literally wore that like a coat every day. I put it on. This is who I am. And I like this work for being able to unpack the backpack and take off the jacket. Like, what happened to us isn't who we are. It's what happened to us. And writing this down and kind of putting it all on paper, I think is an amazing way to be able to shed it and to release it. So I assume we're going to have some type of a releasing ceremonial step for all of this. And I really hope it involves fire. I love to burn things, especially releasing back to the universe. So if not, maybe we could include that anyway. But yeah, I love it. So, all right. So we're going to put everything in. I'll put everything in the comment section of exactly what the steps are. And again, we're here for you guys. Feel free to comment on the YouTube channel or on the Facebook comment section if you guys have any questions specifically for Chris or Morgan. And thank you guys. You guys did a great job today.
Thanks.
Yeah, it was awesome. Cool. All right, I'm going to stop recording. Thanks, everybody.